World History Discussions, Chapter 2 on the Ancient Near East and the Traditions and Encounters textbook. I absolutely love this chapter. A lot of stuff going on, but before we get to our catchy opener about Gilgamesh, which is an awesome story about trying to cheat death, I got a song for you and some map trivia. Remember the band They Might Be Giants in the song, We're the Mesopotamians, Sargon, Hammurabi, Ashurbanipal, and Gilgamesh. And yes, we're going to talk about all four of those guys in this chapter and have some cool discussions. But first, where is Mesopotamia on this world map? Anybody want to guess? Yep, we invaded it in 2003. It's the modern country of Iraq, between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And Baghdad is pretty near where ancient Babylon was, and then the Sumerian city-states are kind of down here in the lower delta, not that far from Basra, where the rivers come together and hit the Persian Gulf. So that's the area that we'll be talking about. We'll also talk about the Hittite Empire and modern-day Turkey, also known as Anatolia, and we'll talk about the Israelites. Yes, the Hebrew kingdom and early Jewish history, and we're going to talk about their neighbors to the north, the Phoenicians, who were great sailors and invented the alphabet and lived in what is now Lebanon. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. When we get to the Assyrians, no, they're not based in Syria. They're based in northern Iraq, but they did expand into Syria and even the Levant at the peak of their empire. And then, of course, this era is going to cover from about 3500 BCE to 539 BC, when these guys, the Persians in Iran, come in and they sack Babylon under Cyrus the Great. That's where this basically ends. And speaking of Iran, looking at current events, there have been a lot of protests there in the past week. It is currently January 2026 as I record this, and I'm really hoping those protesters in Iran will win this fight. So they've had a pretty repressive regime there since 1979, when the fundamentalist Shiites took over the country. And we're going to get to that much, much later in these discussions. I mean, it'll probably be 3 years before we get to 1979 CE. So today we get to have fun and discuss the ancient stuff before all the crazy mess. Although, as you can see, this was a pretty messy area back in those days, too. Iraq, or Mesopotamia, it's in a flat plain and it's easy to invade, and lots of people did invade. We're going to be talking about many different peoples, many different languages, and even many different ethnicities over the course of 3,000 years. Remember that the era from the Sumerians to when the Persians invade is close to 3,000 years, and it's actually only been 2,500 years since the Persian invasion, which is going to be chapter 7 in our textbook. So yeah, we're covering a lot of time here. Just remember that, covering 3,000 years worth of history. But now, our catchy opener, the Epic of Gilgamesh. See if you can find any Old Testament Bible parallels in here. So basically, Gilgamesh is the 5th king of Uruk. And he supposedly reigned for 126 years. So people did live longer in those days. I know people who take the Bible literally believe that people lived longer in those days. I'm not sure. But also people considered him 2/3 divine, which is interesting because the very next chapter is going to be on ancient Egypt. And the pharaohs were completely considered to be gods. Now, there's people that are really into ancient aliens and stuff like that. Now, I don't believe this, but there's people like my old roommate in college over 10 years ago who believed that this group of people from another planet came in and they helped build the pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and that all those kings in the ancient world were considered divine because they were this other group of people. Now, I think that's probably not true. At least it's definitely not the history textbook narrative, but if you can prove it, prove it. But here's where this gets interesting. So Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu or Enkidu, I'm not good at pronunciation, they go out and they fight monsters and they save the city of Kish and the king of Kish from a raging bull, and they do all sorts of great adventures. But then they offend the gods or Enkidu offends the gods, and the gods sentence him to death. Now, Gilgamesh is heartbroken about the loss of his friend Enkidu, so he goes and tries to cheat death. He finds this magical plant that will grant eternal life, but a serpent steals it. Man, this sounds familiar, doesn't it? And so anyway, he finally has to face the fact that death is just a part of the natural cycle of life. And that's our catchy opener, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the fact that unfortunately, everybody eventually dies. That's just part of life.